So
Okay.
thank you, Vanilla, for accepting to do this interview. As we both know, there is the anniversary of the 50 years anniversary of the CyberSyn project and the end of the Allende's government on the 11th of September. And this has become an important date for us, all the cybernetic societies around the world. We are thinking about that moment, about the Stafford, about his legacy. So we decided to start this series of interviews to animate a conversation that is going on about Stafford. So it's very important for us to have your views, both about the Stafford as an individual and about your views about his legacy. So the first thing is, I would like you to tell us briefly from your knowledge of Stafford as a scientist and as a human being. The first thing is, what aspects of Stafford's personality had a major impact on you?
Oh, well, that's a very big question, and I found it almost impossible to separate out aspects of Stafford. He was such a big man, and everything about him was inspiring. His energy, his knowledge, his enthusiasm, his dare I say, his sense of mission. He didn't do downtime, did he? He didn't sort of sit around and say, ho, ho, what's on the telly? He always had a sense that he had a role in society and that it was his job to act on that role.
Mm.
He was very serious about his work. Anyone who knows him knows how incredibly hard he worked. He slept very little. He did a day job if he had one, if he was working for IPC, if he was working for Fox's Steel, whatever the day job was, he did the day job. He would then come home, have some sort of meal, and write all night. He slept about 4 hours, that way he built up a reputation as a manager, as an advisor to managers, as a very young man. I remember sitting on the side of the bath watching him shave. So it was a long time ago. And I don't know what I'd said, but Stafford stopped and looked at me and said, "You think I'm old, don't you?" And I just looked at him. I thought, yeah, of course you're old. My dad. And he just laughed and he said, "There are people that think I am too young for what I'm doing." And actually, thinking about it, he probably wasn't quite 28 then.
Oh,
So a very long time ago. Bless him. Anyway, that's a bit of a deviation.
no, but that's
He's always worked
mm,
flat out
yeah.
and planned carefully, step by step, article by article, book by book. He's thought about his work and about how to disseminate it. He's never been protective. He's never clung to copyrights. He writes about what he does, and he knows that anybody can use his work. And I think that was important to him. The VSM especially. I mean, that's been transformative to many people, not just people who don't call themselves cyberneticians, but understand the principles and can apply them to the complexities of their own work.
Mm.
In fact, I was looking at this piece of paper. These are from oh dear, I can't pronounce anybody's names. This was from an engineer who worked on CyberSyn, who was a friend of Stafford's, via his grandson. He put them online recently, but I believe they are actually in the collection.
Yes.
But it's the first I've seen of them, and I printed them off because they're all in Stafford's writing, and it's so nice to see. And this is cybernetic notes on the effective organization of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're not looking to run the train club or anything. This is serious stuff. The effective organization of the state with particular relevance to industrial control. These notes assume a full understanding of the structure and operation of the hierarchic cybernetic model of a viable system. So he was using the viable system model to run an effective organization of the state. As all this makes very clear, it's all online and it's all available in the collection, it seems. So what were we talking about? I've lost the thread. What was most impressive about Stafford? Well, everything, everything. He had an inquiring mind. He was always willing to listen to his children. He wanted to know what we were doing without prying. If we offered him information, he was ready and willing to explore it. He wanted to know what we were reading, what we were listening to, as we did with him. We were friends. Yeah.
I would like you to talk a little bit more about him as a friend, because I know that you were very close friends. Apart from being
Yes.
father and daughter, you develop a very close friendship. So how did you see him as a friend?
Oh gosh, well, what is a friend? Someone you tell everything to, isn't it? And someone who tells you everything. We shared an awful lot of very private information. He never he wasn't an advisor. He was very keen on Socrates and the Socratic method. And so do you think, that very formal, what do you think and how can I help you midwife this idea and birth this idea as a midwife? Yeah, all that stuff. He was very And I'm trying not to say that he wasn't spontaneous, because he was spontaneous, but at the same time, he was so steeped in the Socratic processes that I don't think he could avoid it, or maybe he was a reincarnation. He always quite liked his physical likeness, the snub nose and the rest of it, to Socrates.
Okay, wonderful. And what do you think that was Stafford's more cherished values? How would you describe things that he believed strongly and he would defend strongly?
Well, he was terrifically fair.
Yeah.
He was a just man. He was an honest man. He was totally authentic. I've never known him use subterfuge or guile, except very particularly to make a point. Like I can think of one example of that, for instance, when he told me he'd given a talk somewhere about oh dear, I'd like to get this right. But the abuse of our first world by taking money from the third world to service debts, that kind of theme. And some bloke came up to him afterwards and said, I'm a banker and I'm not responsible for this. Not quite like that, but he was looking for some sort of absolution. And Stafford clapped him on the back and said, that's all right, my dear fellow. Like he did. That's all right, my dear fellow. I've never yet met a German who was a Nazi. And he said to me he was quite shocked at himself for saying that, because it was a very forceful thing. And the man just turned and walked away, as you can imagine. So, yeah, he was authentic. That's the word I want. He was an authentic human being who lost nothing by anything he did. Does that make any sense?
Oh, total. Thank you very much. Perfect. Yes. And regarding his impact in your life, in your character, in your personality, in your personal development, what do you recall as things that he really transform you and help you to develop the way you are?
Yeah, he was very keen that he did not influence his children. He regarded his generation as a failure. They'd come through the war, and the war was a catastrophe for everybody. And he thought that for his lot to teach our lot anything would be futile. Just teach us to repeat the same errors, of course. Very cybernetic notion.
Yes.
So he never advised or directed us, and waited to see what we would do. And in a sense, that was a bit of a loss. We could have done with a little bit more steerage, shall we say, a little bit more control, a little bit more direction.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm really old. I know that that's wrong. He was absolutely right. You know, if he'd steered any of us into the universities, into the marketplace, whatever,
Yes.
none of us did anything orthodox.
Yes.
And all of us have lived, I think, very full lives. I certainly have. It's a huge shame that my brother Simon died at 62. I
Yes.
mean, he would have had so much to say about all this.
Oh,
And
yes.
and as a scientist and a good one, he was informed. He knew.
Yes.
He had the words. He understood what was going on, which is more than decent for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And regarding his spiritual life, I know that he was a very spiritual person. Some
Yeah.
people find surprising that he could be both as the scientist that he was and a spiritual, very deep spiritual person. How did you experience this aspect of his life of being so much of a spiritual person while he was such a scientist?
Oh, absolutely no problem at all. Because of course I grew up with that thing, which I never saw as a dichotomy, because that's what he taught us. He said, God does not know the difference between arts and sciences and religion, and and of course not. Of course not. These are all aspects, are they not, of what a human is, of what it is to be a human. I was rereading recently his address to the Teilhard de Chardin Society.
Mm.
I'm very keen on republishing that, I think, for Stafford's 100th. It's a very nice piece of work
Mhm.
of framing his spiritual beliefs in a Catholic dialogue,
Yeah.
which makes it very accessible whilst at the same time being extraordinarily mystical.
Yes. Mm.
We'll see what happens about that. But
Yeah.
um, apart from that, he didn't do that much more spiritual writing. There was Wizard Prang. I don't know if that
Yeah.
counts as spiritual. Probably does. I mean, it was a kind of attempt to
Yeah.
bridge a language gap and bring out the mysticism of the human being
Yes.
in a sort of fairy tale context.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I think someone's working on that.
Mhm.
So that would be another nice thing to get out for his 100th.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
And in terms of his policy, his political views, how would you describe his political views?
Well, from the first I knew of him, he was always very left wing.
Hmm.
Um, that within British politics, that meant Labour Party, socialism. He was very keen on the notion of shared wealth. He thought that while property continued to be in the hands of a few, there was very little hope for the British culture. I mean, I'm only thinking now about what I knew when I was a young woman at home in the family house. I can't tell you how he reacted in America, for instance, although I can guess. Um, so yes, the possibility of inherited wealth he thought was an abhorrence, that inherited wealth should not happen. When someone dies, their wealth goes to the public pool, which he said to us children all along. He said, don't expect to get anything, you won't. And I thought that was thoroughly admirable. I have seen friends of mine have their lives ruined by their expectations, knowing they would inherit,
Mm.
not training themselves, not working towards any goals, just waiting for someone to die. And
Yeah.
then there's never enough.
Yeah.
It's horrible, horrible.
But Stafford didn't inherit himself. He was not an aristocrat, was he?
Not at all. When his father died, he'd married again, so he had a second wife and a young child. And he left Stafford, I think, 500 quid, a token. And Stafford bought a very beautiful watch with it, which I now own. Lovely piece of glamorous work, gold watch, absolutely gorgeous. Uh, I must work out which of the children to leave it to for when I die, actually. Um, but no, he inherited nothing from his father, although I believe his half brother, my Uncle John, would have got a house and stuff, but Yeah.
All right. Summarizing all this, we've been talking about the Stafford and his personality. What do you think that that what aspects of Stafford's personality were wrongly portrayed in the Santiago Boys podcast?
Well, quite a lot, actually. I mean, I came away with the feeling that there was this rich guy having a laugh, playing at politics, eating lobster, drinking red wine, which of course he did not in either case eat lobster or drink red wine. He wouldn't touch oysters either. So, it's ridiculous nonsense. It's just like a playboy,
Yes.
a rich playboy. And it was absurd. I mean, I've never met anyone who worked so hard and was so determined to try and change the things he regarded as unequal opportunities.
Yes.
Should go, that everybody should be equal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Right, and regarding the CyberSyn project, when did Stafford really produce the most important part of his work? Was it before or after the CyberSyn project?
Oh, I can't answer that. I think it was a continuum, you know. I mean, the CyberSyn project was a big explosion in the Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. My nose keeps running. The CyberSyn project was a coming together of all the work that he'd been doing to that date, and then after that date, there were amplifications. I mean, syntegration began after that date, and I think syntegration is terribly important. It's an opportunity for everyone to have an equal voice in a formal way. I don't know why it's not more used, except that it's kind of easy to sabotage it if you've got naughty people there, which generally a group of 30, at least one of them's naughty. So, and also it's quite a lengthy process. So I understand that people have cut it back to a couple of days, so instead of the week, or a couple of hours instead of a couple of days. I don't know. But as a process, if people can be prepared to put the time in, then it's a fantastic route to get the right questions for, is it level 3 in the VSM? Which is important, and that was after CyberSyn.
Yeah. And the books as well. I mean, he published the
books,
after the CyberSyn project, and he really increased his understanding of cybernetics, and really the most important publications came after Chile, no?
I think you're right. I think that was the beginning of cybernetics as we know it. I mean, I'm not a cybernetician, but it certainly seems that way to me. He was the fulcrum after their old boys died off, you know, after Wiener's death, after yes, as the old guard died and the new guard came up, I think Stafford was the forerunner and the one who had the most creativity to guide it.
We know that.
Seemed to me.
Yeah. And regarding the CyberSyn project, do you think that Stafford was politically naive, that he was not aware of the complexity to put
not a bit of it, you know, for a man who'd worked in industry all over the world, there was no naivety about him. He understood the blocks and the difficulties he'd run into. Of course he did, and he was prepared for them. I mean, look at the stuff he did in preparation for the blocks that would arrive. I mean, the man was streets ahead of his day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, to call him politically naive is insulting, actually, and just not true.
I agree completely. And regarding this perception of some people that the CyberSyn project was more a way of using technology to control the people, to support the management and to control the people. What do you think about this perception?
Well, just read what he's written about it. I mean, it's simply not the case. He says you have to use managers because otherwise you can't disperse the message. In fact, there's I think there's a good bit here about that. Let me see. Oh no, wrong bit of paper. But yeah, you use managers because they're the ones with the time to plan and to keep rolling out ideas and for things to change constantly. I mean, it's a very organic process, the VSM, which is, I suspect, one of its big triumphs. You know, the continual creation process, the checks and balances, the ideas, the growth, all that stuff is it's new, or it was in the day.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that it isn't still new, you know, that this sense of rolling out and growing.
Yeah. And thinking about the current times, the organizations who are living, the political context, who are living an economic context, what do you think that Stafford's work continue to be relevant? Do you think that it continue to be relevant, and why?
Well, I don't know if he was effectively. I mean, I just don't know. But he damn well should have been. I mean, the little I know about it, he had an impact on other countries in South America, Mexico, Argentina. What's that other place there? Anyway, I'm sure you know better than I do, but I'm sure those countries had some sense of possibility after Stafford. I mean, the mere fact that they came down so heavily on him must have given them courage because you know, nobody trashes you like that unless you're worth something. Do you
Exactly.
remember he used to say, I know that perhaps this isn't relevant, it's more relevant to climate change, but he used to say the more you are ignored, the more successful you are. No, that's not quite right. I can't remember the aphorism. You know it. You
Yeah,
know it.
yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
bigger the problem that is ignored, the more important it is.
Yes,
Yes.
it's true, it's true. Well, that may explain as well. Perhaps his theory was so ahead of the time that it has been ignored for many years, and I think that it's only now that is beginning to emerge with a lot of strength, and is attracting a lot of people, and lots of people are interested in looking back and continue developing these ideas. No?
Yes, there's that. I mean, it does seem strange, doesn't it, that with one computer and what 700 telexes, they got all this stuff together, and now we've got. I mean, I've got more in this bush than Stafford could have dreamt of, and yet nothing's happening. It's weird, isn't it?
Exactly.
Here we all are in a world that all of us thinks is dying,
Yes,
with governments that all of us think are shits, and we
yes.
still can't do anything about it. It seems extraordinarily odd.
It's extraordinary. Yes, yes, and because perhaps we need to start listening again and thinking again many of the things that he saw in those days that will really benefit from understanding them again in this moment. It's,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. Well, we certainly ought to do something, or just accept that we're extinct.
exactly. Right.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, Vanilla. This is really good.
it's a pleasure. I'm sorry I'm a bit
No,
coldy.
don't worry. No, not a problem at all. Let me then